Welcome to today's online webinar, Affording Christian Education, a session in which we will consider the value of a private Christian education at Westminster Catawba Christian School and the surrounding Rock Hill, Charlotte area, along with some helpful strategies, tips, and opportunities for families. This session will be about 30 minutes long and will hopefully help our families as they are considering the investment in Christian education. My name is Jane Wilson, and I am the admissions director here at WCCS. I am joined today by our business office assistant, Kristen Cavalo. And before we get started on our topic at hand, we would like to introduce ourselves. So again, my name is Jane Wilson. My husband, Jeb, and I are in this picture. We have two boys. Burris is in first grade and Mac is in seventh grade here at the school, and we have been a part of the school for 10 years now. Kristen, thank you for joining us today. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hi there. I am a somewhat recent transplant to South Carolina. I've actually been here almost 2 years now, but I grew up in Arizona where I attended Christian school myself before working in Christian education for 12 years. I'm so happy to be here at WCCS, where I get to assist families with tuition payments and financial aid, as well as work in other areas of the business office. I'm also currently working toward my master's in counseling. And in the photos there, you'll see me with my wonderful parents and brother who still live in Arizona, and my two sweet dogs.
Thank you, Kristen. We're so excited to have you with us today. So both Kristen and I have experience not only in working with families as they are choosing to make Christian education a priority for their children, but we also understand personally the choices that are made by our families to invest in Christian education and how to stay on track to achieve that goal of seeing children through to graduation. My guess is that you are watching and joining us here today because you are desiring a different educational experience for your child, but you're not sure how you can afford a private school education. You might be feeling overwhelmed at the thought of juggling your budget to pay for school, or you might be wondering how you can pay for private school long term. As we consider our topic today, we are going to walk through several different areas of consideration. First, we are going to talk about establishing priorities. We're then going to consider God's provision. We're going to have a little debate whether or not Christian education should be considered an investment or a sacrifice. We're going to talk a little bit about value, and then we're going to look at some practical tips that you as families can consider. Kristen, what are some things that parents really should think about as we're considering how to educate our children?
Thanks, Jane. I really appreciate the opportunity to come alongside our families as you are making these critical decisions for your children's future, and perhaps share some of my own personal experiences as a Christian school alumna. You and I have had many conversations with families over the year and have been so blessed to be surrounded by so many like-minded families who have seen the value in Christian education. And I hope that today we can share some of our thoughts around these central ideas, as well as give some practical tips that might help families as they're trying to decide what is best for their children's educational future. So the first thing that we start with is establishing priorities. This is a very important decision for families to make. You're here because of an unmet need somewhere, but there are fantastic schools everywhere. So Jane, you're a product of public school, and there are some great schools around us in the area, but for you, what made you choose WCCS for your children?
You're right, Kristen. You know, my husband and I, we both went to and graduated from public schools. And we had family members that attended other schools in the area too, charter schools, private schools, homeschool, et cetera. There really are great options all around for families to consider. My husband is a farmer, so he owns his own business. He works hard. We're also very involved in our own family and our church and our local community. So when we were looking at Christian education at this school, you know, finances were a big consideration. But when we were, having a family and our family was growing, my oldest, he was at the time going into preschool. We knew we wanted an environment in particular, a covenantal school where, as believers, we felt like it was important that we had like-minded families and faculty and staff that were invested in preparing our kids, not just academically, but socially, emotionally, and certainly spiritually. We knew we wanted an education that would prepare our sons to go out and be disciples for Christ. We want them to go out into the world and make a difference for the kingdom. And we knew that we couldn't do that alone as believers, as parents. We knew we needed support. And so we wanted to partner with like-minded staff and faculty and other parents. And for many of the families that I meet with, this is a key factor driving you to look at our school as well.
Absolutely. Having that support system in a school is really such a blessing. So, as you're deciding to prioritize Christian education, you also need to consider the financial logistics of that. First, you have to be realistic about your family's financial capability. There are some schools out there that are higher price points than what you might be able to afford as a family. And then there are others that are more within a family's budget and price range. For your family, you'll need to choose a budget that would accommodate a private school tuition and consider whether you may need to cut back in other areas to make that a priority. Certainly, you'll need to consider that there are bumps in tuition from one level to another as your children get older, but also just think about the year before you now, because you would be amazed at God's provision and how He can provide from year to year in ways that you just wouldn't even imagine. For my family growing up, affording Christian school for my brother and I wasn't easy. My dad was a firefighter. My mom worked part-time in the office at the Christian preschool we'd attended. So while we were able to cover everyday expenses, adding tuition for two was a big stretch, one that we were only able to make through extra blessings and opportunities that God provided, like scholarships, contributions sometimes from my grandparents, and my dad working extra duty shifts or side jobs to make up the difference. Sometimes we had to forego some of those nice to have but non-essential things to make a Christian education possible. And, we were okay with that. I really appreciate the example that my parents set in that. I learned from a young age that it was okay to do without some things you want in order to have the things that really matter and are lasting. And the foundation I received in Christian school, I truly believe it set me up for the rest of my life, academically, but more importantly, spiritually. As a family, it's important for you to establish personal priorities when considering what is most important to have in choosing a school. So, Jane, I would really like to know how you and your husband, as parents making the choice to pay tuition for Christian school, involve God in this decision.
That's a great question. As believers, every decision that we have should be brought to the Lord, right? But oftentimes we either forget or we think that something is, too meaningless or too meaningful to bring before the Lord. But we also have to recognize as believers that everything that we have been given in this life is from the Lord. Our resources, our talents, even our money, all the money that we make, the job that we have been afforded, the gifts that we receive, that's really God's money. And, as believers, the Bible teaches us that we are to tithe that back to the church. And certainly we do that. Commitments to our own church, to local community organizations and charities that we believe in. And then there's the sacrificial giving outside of the tithe, right? The part that sometimes hurts a little bit. And we felt like, after making that tithe to our church, we wanted to be able to sacrificially give and commit to our children. And we feel like for us and for many of our peer families, we want to use God's provisions well. And so when we're stewarding those resources and choosing to use those resources to immerse our kids into the right environment, into the right setting, to grow educationally as disciples for Christ, that's being a good steward of God's provisions. And when you feel like you're being a good steward of God's provisions, it makes it easier, I think, to write that tuition check. And, certainly I'm not, promising blessings along the way, but it really is amazing. As you referenced earlier, when you are taking this decision year by year, it's amazing to see what God will do along the way to make this possible, to take your priorities as a family when you are putting them before the Lord and trusting Him. God will make them a reality if that is His will for your family to invest in Christian education. From my own personal experience, I remember this was like year 1 or 2. My son now in 7th grade, going from 3K to 4K, we were considering that bump in tuition and just that reinvestment in another year. That's a big decision to make. And I remember we were praying about this. How are we going to fit this into our budget? And lo and behold, literally out of nowhere, there was a second income stream that became available to my husband that was only from the Lord, considering the timing and the financial impact of that. And so that's just one example in my own life. But I think it's important that we as believers not only consider God's provision, but trust Him in that process as we are considering this year by year. As we're considering, Kristen, one of the questions that I get a lot, and maybe we'll have a little debate here. What do you think? Should we consider Christian education an investment or a sacrifice?
I think that's a great question. As I mentioned earlier, I know my parents did make some level of sacrifice for my brother and I to both attend Christian school. But really, more than a sacrifice, I believe that they saw it as an investment in my and my brother's lives and futures. Investment is trading an asset for an asset. So you can either put this money into something like 401k or into your children and their education. And yes, contributing to retirement is a good idea. I'm not telling you to stop doing that, but God and our family are really the best places to invest our provisions, right? So, sacrifice has such a negative connotation, like you're giving up something very painfully. And I know that for my parents, it was truly a joy to give us the opportunity to have a Christian education. And it also can be a huge payoff for your children in their future. I credit my foundation in Christian education with helping me earn the scholarship that paid my full university tuition, other college expenses, and even international travel, which was amazing. But more importantly, I know that my Christian education played a vital role in building my strong relationship with the Lord and a passion for serving His kingdom. Leaving college debt-free was a huge blessing, but my walk with Jesus is the most valuable part of my life. And I know that there are countless examples of graduates from our school and what they are doing to advance their careers, their educations, and the kingdom of God. And what they're doing as a result of the education they've been given here is far and away worth the quote unquote sacrifice, or rather investment, that their parents made along the way.
I think that's really important. Words can be so powerful. And I think, you mentioned that word sacrifice does have a negative connotation. And, when we use that over and over again, it does feel painful, right? But the idea that as an investment in Christian education, you're trading an asset for an asset, that is a win-win. And in my mind, an eternal one at that. I think that changes the conversation and the mindset in such a way that, it helps us establish our priorities and to see value. And you're right, our alumni stories really are amazing when you consider the difference that our graduates are making for Christ in their communities. We're even hosting another webinar, just a little plug, at the end of the month, November 30th, also at 12:30. This is going to be with our college and career counselor and some alumni guests. And we're going to together consider the outcomes and the value of a Christian education through some testimonials, some statistics, and things like that. So you can hopefully find registration. I think I put it in the chat window. It should be the first link that you see there. If you're interested in signing up for that as well, also it's available on our website. But as we're considering that, next piece, the value or the return on investment, let's talk about that. Let's talk about value. So, just like anything, when we're looking at making a purchasing decision, right? When we're considering different schools, maybe we're going to buy a car or a home. We don't just want to look at the cost. We want to look at the value. do your research. My husband and I sat down and we thought about the things that we wanted for our own boys in school. We decided we wanted a very strong college prep curriculum that would prepare them academically. We wanted a Christian environment with Christian biblical values. We wanted a great staff and leadership that were committed to a wonderful vision. And we also really felt like a covenant school where families that are like-minded were committed to the same vision, where we all kind of feel part of a larger community or family of believers. And we're focused together on raising that next generation of Christ. Those were the priorities that were important to us.
Those are great priorities, Jane. Families know what is most important to them, and each family has to prioritize the unique needs of their own kids and seek value in a school that is based on those needs. So some common things that you would want to think of in terms of value are the academics, having a faith-based education, student-teacher ratios, athletic and arts programs that might be available, and safe facilities. And if you find all these things in the school that are important to you and your family, writing that tuition check becomes so much easier.
Absolutely. I agree. And I am putting that link back up to the webinar. I've heard from a couple of you that you didn't see the link, so hopefully you are seeing it now. But we'll keep going. So our next thing, as we consider, we've talked about, priorities and value, even God's provision. And now you want to get down to the nitty-gritty, right? You want to hear some practical tips. How can we take the stories that we've shared today and make this happen? And yes, there are stories and examples that I know of where families have made different decisions and made this work in different ways for them. Sometimes it's a spouse being able to throttle up, maybe taking on a part-time or a full-time employment opportunity. Other families, Kristen, you mentioned your dad took on a second job. I've heard of that as well. Tightening of the belt is also certainly an option that some families have done in their budgeting process. And maybe that means you forego a vacation, or maybe that means a family makes other decisions to maintain the ability to afford that tuition payment. We also have a number of families who have received support over the years from another family member or a friend. Maybe it's a grandparent. And in those cases, I've seen that those are most successful when you involve the grandparent in, not only the educational choices. I've done lots of tours with grandparents, but also in just the communication from the school. And you let them see the kids' artwork and things like that, because they're now seeing the value in the investment themselves. Also, most schools have some kind of assistance program available to them. That includes our school as well. And so I always advise any interested families that are looking at different options, take full advantage of resources, ask questions, like talk to our admissions, our business office. We are here to help you to see what options are available if you are facing financial hardship, or maybe you're trying to consider how you can fit a private school tuition payment into your budget. In fact, Kristen, can you tell us about some of those opportunities at our school that might be available to families?
Definitely. At our school, we offer a program to qualified families of kindergarten through 12th grade students called variable tuition. It is a range of tuition pricing that families can apply for to receive as much as 50% off of the sticker price or the top end of that range. So families who don't qualify for assistance or don't apply for variable tuition will pay the top end of that range. But for those who do apply, we use an independent company, Facts, to assess each family's financial need. And then there's a committee at the school that meets to consider the final award amount. These awards are based on many factors, such as income, expenses, size of the family, special circumstances, and timing of the application submission. We do have more available to award in the spring prior to the next year than in August, for example. And variable tuition applications open in January for the upcoming school year. So we advise interested families to apply for these funds sooner rather than later, as our budget is limited.
Absolutely. And on the screen there, you'll see an example of our variable tuition ranges for this current school year. I will say we do adjust a couple of percentage points from year to year, and usually the tuition prices are set and announced in January, also prior to that next school year. So that's coming up soon, but this is a good frame of reference for you. And we will start making decisions on our first round of variable tuition awards in February of 2022. So if this program interests you, please make plans to do that application for variable tuition as soon as you can in January. Another question that I get about this program, Kristen, sometimes I will get calls of folks, that are interested in this, but they know that it's a process and it does take a lot of time. And so a common question is there just an income level that you can tell me, or a bracket that you can tell me, that would just disqualify families from receiving variable tuition?
That's a good question, but not really. Without going through the variable tuition application process, there really isn't any way for us to know that, because there are just too many variables that are considered in each family's unique situation. It is a needs-based application program, however, so families with a reported income of, I don't know, let's say millions of dollars probably don't qualify for assistance. But that being said, we recognize that there is much more than income involved in a family's financial situation. And we do take into consideration any extenuating circumstances.
Absolutely. So for anybody listening, if you're interested in this program, you don't know whether or not you would qualify, my advice is apply, see what the results might be, because, we do use an independent company to do that. So that's great that you get an objective, assessment. But here at the school, we try to, do our best for each family as well, just based on those recommendations from that company and your situation. Other practical tips, Kristen, not many families are aware that there are different ways to pay or schedule your payment plans for tuition. Can you walk us through some of those options?
Sure. We offer 3 different payment plans where families can either pay in full upfront, they can schedule semester payments, or they can schedule monthly payments. So monthly payments start as early as June and they all end in May. And it just depends on when a family registers, what that looks like. But we'll talk a little bit more about that. For some of you math folks, I've taken a kindergarten tuition rate for this 21-22 school year, and I'm showing you what payments would look like for a full pay student for this current school year with each of the 3 options. Sometimes breaking it down per month, especially when you consider that you can spread it out over 12 months, not just 10, makes those payments a little more accessible to families. So you'll see first, there's the full pay option for full kindergarten tuition without any variable tuition applied for 21-22. The cost is $8,670. And if you choose the annual plan, that would be paid in full before your child starts school. If you choose the semi-annual plan, that would be paying half, $4,335 before school starts. This is typically paid in June. And then the other half, $4,335, would be paid in January. And then you've got the monthly option. So if you choose the monthly plan, that amount would be $722.50 per month if you're following the 12-month schedule of June through May, which is the typical schedule. Most families are registered before June, and so they start making their payments then and follow that 12-month schedule. If for some reason somebody was registering later after June, then that would be adjusted to fewer months and a larger monthly payment.
Absolutely. Thank you, Kristen. That's helpful to kind of walk through that and just see some numbers. We also have families that may be interested in using what's known as a 529 plan to pay for tuition. Can you tell us a little bit about that option?
Yes, it is a great option. It's been available for college for a long time, but it was opened up to K through 12 families a few years ago. So a 529 plan is an investment account. It falls under Section 529 of the IRS tax code, which is where we get the name. And what happens is you just contribute after-tax dollars, but any gains and funds can be withdrawn tax-free if they are used for qualified education expenses. So these accounts can be set up by parents for their children, but other family members and friends can contribute to them as well. And parents can then withdraw up to $10,000 per child per year with no tax paid on what is withdrawn, as long as the funds are used for qualifying expenses, which now include K through 12 education. 529 plans are sponsored by individual states, and each of them have their own characteristics. So for South Carolina, the plan is through Future Scholar, and for North Carolina, the plan is through the College Foundation of North Carolina. Some states, like South Carolina, also allow you to receive a deduction on state taxes for contributions to a 529 plan, while others, like North Carolina, don't offer that. So I would encourage you to look up your state's plan for full details and to contact your financial advisor to give your family recommendations on how this might work best for you.
I think that's a great option. And I will reiterate, neither Kristen nor I are financial advisors. So you know what, is going to work best for your family, and your financial advisor knows even better in many cases. So if you have questions about this, contact them for specifics on how this works and how this might benefit or not be a good option, just depending for your family. So Kristen, thank you so much for sharing these practical tips, nuts and bolts on options like variable tuition, payment plan options, even 529 plans. And to conclude, as we're considering all these strategies, I think it's important for us to consider what benefits are of investing in a Christian education, in a private education, in a WCCS education. And first, I think, we all need to consider, what is the payoff, right? What is the return on investment? And I teased earlier that we'll be exploring this a little bit more as far as stats and testimonials a little bit later in November, if you'd like to register for that webinar. But ultimately, the payoff, when you see your children thriving in the Lord, there is no other, comparison to that. That's a priceless investment, we feel like. Our own school's theme verse is 3 John 4. I have no greater joy than to see that my children are walking in the Lord. And while we know enrolling in a Christian school is not going to guarantee your child's salvation, but it is a step that my husband and I, as parents, we felt like we wanted to set our boys up for the best possible scenario, not only to know the Lord, certainly going to church and doing that in our home, but we wanted them to be able to grow in his wisdom and have a strong partnership with an educational institution. And then when that translates, we're not there yet, but I know of so many graduates. And when you see what your kids have become when they graduate, when I have tours of community members that say, oh, I know so-and-so, so-and-so, and so-and-so who graduated from your school, and they are just doing such amazing things for Christ. There's no amount of money that can make up for that outcome. The impact that our students have in our community and how they're touching others for Christ, it's just an amazing thing to witness. Another practical benefit, I will say, and this is going to sound silly, but it's real, is that when your child graduates and you are used to working that tuition check into your budget, writing a college tuition payment is something that you're already accustomed to. And you are prepared financially to work this into your budget. It's not such a shock to the system, and you're ready for that as a family. Now, many of our students receive great scholarships and grants and opportunities to help offset the cost of college tuition because of the opportunities and the achievements that they have been afforded at our school. But certainly, as a family, to be used to that financial investment year by year, I think that's a win-win when you have that already worked in.
Yeah, those are great benefits, Jane. Just to wrap up, there is a lot that goes into these decisions. When you are setting the right priorities for your family and your children, when you're considering that this is God's money and provision to be stewarded well, when you think of this as an investment and not just a sacrifice, when you make a decision based on value, when you have practical ways to make this a reality and to think about the benefits of an investment, trading an asset for an asset, it becomes easy. So you make a plan to make it happen. It's something that you could pray for, should be praying for every year. And, surround yourself with peers who can help you out, and the school can help you as well.
Absolutely. Kristen, I just want to thank you for joining us today. It's helpful to have that perspective from the business office, about how we can make this a reality. And I hope that as you've been watching in today's presentation, that you've been encouraged by our stories, by our practical tips, by the things that, we're encouraging ourselves to consider as we are really examining our hearts and our commitments to our children and that investment in Christian education. I want to also send a reminder that there is a link. There are now 2 links, actually. There's a link in our chat box, the first link that if you are interested in registering for that November 30th webinar about the return on investment in a Christian education at WCCS, you can do so through that. Also, we have added another free resource for our families considering school choices. You will find there is a downloadable ebook that we have developed called 26 Questions You Should Ask. And this is just a list of some great questions for any family considering any school as you're determining the right fit for your child and your family. If you're watching this as a recording and don't see it in the chat box, this will be available on the downloadable webpage to watch the recording as well. Finally, if you are looking for a place to partner with you in the education of your child, to prepare him or her not only for college and for career, but for a life of service to our King and his kingdom, we would love for you to come visit with us. We are hosting in-person tours. You can find my online tour scheduler on our website. You can also contact me directly to see what options might be available to you. I'd love to meet you. And then finally, I hope this presentation has been helpful to you. Certainly, there may be other questions along the way that you've had pop up. And so we would just encourage you, Kristen and I would contact one of us, both of us, with any questions that you might have or considerations. We are here to be a resource to you and to help you as you are considering all the wonderful options that you have for your family. All right, well, we want to thank you all for joining us on our webinar today. Have a wonderful day.